We move to the next debate.
Thank you, Mr. Paisley. It gives me great pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. I beg to move that this House has considered the establishment of a Truth and Reconciliation Commission in Sri Lanka. And I'm delighted to be joined by fellow members of the APPG for Tamils. I think it represents the depth of feeling with the Tamil diaspora in particular in our constituencies. I was here yesterday leading a debate about cystic fibrosis when it was my first time in this place where it was standing room only. But the fact is that there were so many members at that debate does not negate the importance of the debate that we have today, because each of us each member in this room today represents many thousands of Tamil diaspora that still remain concerned about what is happening in Sri Lanka and the slow progress, in particular, of the Sri Lankan government meeting the terms of Resolution 30/1 at the UNHRC that they themselves co-sponsored in a unique move. I will give way.
I thank him very much for securing this debate, and he's right, there's very much all-party agreement on this issue. Does he agree with me that one of the critical things we need from the Sri Lankan government is a commitment to timescales, the timescales by which they will have delivered the commitments that they have made?
I thank the honourable gentleman for that remark, that intervention, and I absolutely agree with him. One of the things that we do want to talk about today is the fact that we are nearly 3 years into this. The Resolution 30/1 has been extended for a further 2 years, and we're halfway through that extension. And what none of us want is to reach the impasse in a year's time when we're back in Geneva, back looking at the UNHRC and saying, OK, guys, well, what's happened? Nothing. And when we spoke to the minister as the parliamentary group a little while ago, I think we said about if we get to this stage and still not much is happening, alarm bells would be ringing. I remember asking the minister what that meant, what the alarm bells meant. My concern is that the UNHRC, when we went there, the member for Ilford North, he'll tell me the better part of Ilford, I'm sure. When we were there earlier on, it seemed to be a sense that there's not a lot the UNHRC can be doing, that's what's slightly concerning. I will give way.
Can I congratulate the honourable member for securing this debate and for the work he's doing as chair of the all-party group? Whilst not much is happening, and whilst the UNHRC don't seem to be able to move forward, Sri Lanka has witnessed an appalling sectarian violence in recent weeks, which has resulted in the imposition of a state of emergency for the first time in 7 years. Does the honourable member agree with me that unless the Sri Lankan government finally tackles this culture of impunity on the island and provides a genuine reckoning with the past, which is what I think he is arguing for, the country will be unable to lay the foundations of any sustainable peace?
I thank the honourable lady for that intervention, and first of all may I apologise for the fact to the members that it's only a 30-minute debate, and so they may not have as much chance as I know they would wish to share their views for their constituents, but I'm sure the Minister will be slightly more pleased that he's got a little bit more time to respond and to actually go out and to talk to the Sri Lankan government and other people rather than spend time here on that matter. I will give way in a second, but if I can just answer the question about sectarian violence, the honourable lady is absolutely right. You know, it was recently when the outbreak of violence with petrol bombs thrown at Muslim homes, shops, mosques, and this is a real concern, because there is an ongoing pattern of violence, systemic use of violence by the authorities, and a number of other issues which I'll try and touch on. But one of the things that I always try and do when I look at countries around that particular area, and I've just come from an International Development Committee meeting talking about Burma and Bangladesh, is triangulate what happens in those different countries. And what is happening in Sri Lanka in the sectarian violence against Muslims has real echoes of what is happening in Burma at the moment with the Rohingya Muslims. Indeed, there are Rohingyas in Sri Lanka itself. And when I look at Bangladesh, it concerns me that we are in a position that unless we can get the Truth and Reconciliation mechanism moving, that has the confidence of both the diaspora, but most importantly, the people left in Sri Lanka, then we are going to be in a situation when we're just in a repeat cycle. And you only need to look at Bangladesh now and the way that party politics tends to work in Bangladesh. There's still echoes of the War of Independence and the aftermath of the War of Independence, some 47 years on. I'll give way to the member for Strangford.
I'll congratulate the Honourable Gentleman on bringing it forward. When you look back in the past, as the Honourable Lady referred to, the freedom of religion was one of the key issues. The destruction of churches, the persecution of people, the murder of people for their faith was something. So when it comes to truth and reconciliation, it's something we would very much like to see. So does the Honourable Member also not further agree that in order for trust to be rebuilt within a community ravaged by guerrilla warfare and terrorism, that people need to believe that there's a way of trusting a new generation, and that support and education of children is a true driver in securing a future and hope for a war-torn nation, and also the freedom of religion to worship your God as you so wish to do?
I thank the Honourable Gentleman for that intervention, and he's absolutely right. The way we are going to be moving through this, as well as the Truth and Reconciliation, is through education. I think it's really important. When I'm going to Tamil school in my constituency, I think it's this Saturday. What I always welcome when we go to those sort of cultural events is that British Tamils celebrate their heritage. They celebrate it through song, they celebrate it through dance, poetry, etc. But they also remember. And they also remember in the same way that we have not long been through Holocaust Memorial Day here, when we look back at the atrocities that ravaged around Europe, that they can look back at what happened in Mullavatayal and these kind of atrocities. I know, again, I was with the Honourable Member for Ilford North, when one of the toughest things I had to sit through was actually listening to just in this place, was listening to some of the testament by survivors of Mullavatayal, when they talked about people have gone missing, people have been literally ripped in half by shelling of a hospital that had been deliberately targeted by the army. When you give, you normally in conflict give the coordinates of hospitals and such like in order for them to be avoided. This absolutely looked like it had been deliberately targeted, and so it really does become incredibly difficult, and therefore you can see why people are so emotional. Even now, again, hopping slightly back to Bangladesh for a second, we've got the 47th anniversary of independence, and it was only on last Saturday that I was speaking to a veteran of that war, and he was in tears recounting his story. This is 47 years ago. In Sri Lanka's case, you're talking about 2009. You're talking about just a blink of an eye, and so it's no surprise that emotion is so raw. And so where are we with Sri Lanka at the moment? In 30/1, in the UNHRC, it doesn't just talk about the Truth and Reconciliation and Justice mechanism. It talks about human rights in general. It talks about the Prevention of Terrorism Act that needs to be ripped up and started again to bring it up to modern day standards. It talks about land grabbing and the return of land to people. We often talk, as the Honourable Member for Strangford says, about, in terms of religious tolerance, about Buddhist structures that have also been popping up in the north and the east of the country, which does antagonise the Tamils there. But it talks about setting up the Office of Missing Persons. And one of the things, although that has now started and that is, it's been signed off, what we really need to see is that office actually properly established and doing its work. If we can have support from the UN, from the international community in helping it do its work, then that's got to be welcomed. And I really hope the Sri Lankan government will start to respond positively to such requests. When we were in Geneva, we saw a traffic light system, a RAG system of rating how the Sri Lankan government have been progressing on their the resolution, and there were far too many red lights for our liking, and there were some things were really low-hanging fruit that they could do. There is a list of the disappeared that we have, but it's never been published. That the government have that list. Why can they not just publish that? we met the mothers of the disappeared, a small group of people who had lost their husbands, their children, their grandchildren, and we met them, we took some photos with them, but we didn't want to share those photos because for fear of what they might have to go back to. And this cannot be right, that these people, having had so much pain, so much suffering, are literally in fear of their own lives and reprisals when they go back to their home country. And so it's really important that we look at this moving forward. So I will give way.
I'm grateful to the Honourable Member for giving way. I mean, does he agree with me that the people in Sri Lanka who don't want this resolution to be implemented are effectively engaged in a war of attrition, both with more progressive elements within their own government, but also within the wider international community, hoping that as time passes, as personnel like the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights moves on and governments change, that we'll just forget about it and think they can move on with impunity. And that's exactly why the international community needs to keep up external pressure on the Sri Lankan government to make sure that it signs up to the commitments that it made alongside the rest of the international community in that important UN Human Rights Council resolution.
The Honourable Gentleman makes a very, very good point, and it goes back to what the Honourable Member for Carshot-Wallington was saying as well, that it is too easy for this to drift. It is too easy for us to get to next year, as I was saying, and just find that nothing has happened, which is why a time-bound plan, as the Honourable Gentleman suggests, is the right way forward. It does mean that we can actually look at staging posts along the way to make sure that action does happen. I will give way.
Again, would he agree with me that the Sri Lankan government have nothing to fear from this? Because, of course, for instance, the Office for Missing Persons or a Truth and Reconciliation Commission, that is something that would look at what happened on both sides. So this is a benefit to everybody in Sri Lanka, not one group or another.
No, the Honourable Gentleman makes an absolutely valid point. This is true. This is a way of moving forward for both sides. And move forward it needs to do, because Sri Lanka has just received GSP Plus status, favoured trading status from the European Parliament, much to the frustration of the parliamentary group, the all-party parliamentary group. Because we all want to see Sri Lanka succeed. Of course, we want to see the economy develop for the sake of the people of Sri Lanka, including Tamils and Sinhalese and all people of Sri Lanka. But nonetheless, there is a fear that it's just gone too quickly, and we're just releasing all of our levers of influence before we've actually seen any sort of sense of meaningful progress. So if we can move this on through a time-bound plan, this is the way, I believe, and we believe, is the way forward. One of the concerns, when we were in Geneva, we met representatives from the missions of Germany, Macedonia, Canada, India, and the EU mission themselves. And we were asking them, they all seemed to be incredibly supportive of keeping the heat on Sri Lanka, to make sure that they adhere to the resolution that, as I said, they themselves co-sponsored. But we asked the question, well, okay, fine, when we get to next year, what actually happens? And the answer was a bit of a shrug of the shoulders, really, because they can come up with another resolution. The UN Security Council is one way of doing it, but that's a very different arm. That's a very different instrument, and you get into a whole other dynamics of geopolitics if you go down that route. And this really is human rights, not necessarily security. So it's two separate issues. So what other avenue does the UNHRC have? And I do fear that there isn't one. So you have to then look at the validity and the purpose of the UNHRC, and if they need to be seen to be effective. Otherwise, it just undermines the institution itself. And of course, what it means is that you can have a situation where people will feel that they are able to do what they want. Again, I'll come back to places like Burma, when if they can do something without any punishment, without any repercussions, without any forward view, then why not do what they want to be able to do? They need the international community to be able to act, and to be able to act effectively. I will give way.
Would would he agree with me that the restoration of GSP Plus by the European Union is like giving a signal that things are moving forward, when in fact nothing has moved forward? And I just wonder if he can agree with me that when the Minister responds, it would be useful to know exactly what line the Minister took on this restoration and how firm he was with the European Union on the matter, because I don't think for a moment it should have been restored.
I thank the honourable lady for that point. I think the GSP Plus, absolutely, as I say, has its purpose in building Sri Lanka's economy, but it was just far too early. I think this is the point. It's far too early. Nobody wants to hold a country like Sri Lanka back, because there will be too many people affected by a lack of development of the economy. But nonetheless, the Sri Lankan government, which is going through its own problems, frankly, we've seen that with the recent elections, really does we need strong leadership. The Sri Lankan people themselves, more to the point, need strong leadership. It's not for us, because we are not there to run the country for them. We're not there to tell them what to do in terms of how they govern the country. What we are here to do, though, as critical friends, is to make sure that human rights abuses do not continue, and historical human rights abuses are dealt with in a firm but fair way. And that, just briefly, I'll just finally come on to the main body of this, which is not the ongoing human rights, but it's actually settling what has been, and that is the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Whereas we've looked at we talked about the Office of Missing Persons, we've talked about the Prevention of Terrorism Act, we've talked about the systemic use of violence, for ongoing violence in the police force and land grabbing. What people here need, the 2,500 odd Tamil diaspora group that I have in my constituency, and indeed similar numbers in the other honourable members in this chamber today, and across the world, across Canada, Australia, and all places, but of course what the Tamils need in Sri Lanka as well, is a system of reconciliation and justice that has international and independent representation on it, so that those people can actually tell their story, they can share their story, and bring people to book with confidence, knowing that they are not standing in front of those people that might have perpetrated the crime. They're not standing in front of people who are friends of those that perpetrated the crime, and that they can have the confidence that they will get justice, the reprisals will not follow for them or their family, and then they can make it safe for the people in Sri Lanka to remain there, to remain in their communities, and ultimately make it safe for the diaspora group to be able to go back and forth from Sri Lanka, invest in Sri Lanka, more to the point. And this comes back to GSP Plus and the economy as a wider view. If we can get the diaspora here, who have gone on to do some really, really good things economically, and they provided such a great contribution to this country, if we can get them to have the confidence to be able to go back and invest in their country, then that will be great for the whole of Sri Lanka. If we can move that judicial process on with our support, with international support, then that has to be a good thing. I asked the Minister if he will respond, and if he will make sure that he keeps that pressure on, and maybe details what more we can do to secure a time-bound plan. And ultimately, if Sri Lanka don't adhere to Resolution 30/1, what is the next moves that we can do? Thank you.